All right, so we should be live right now, but before we kind of get this thing underway, is there anything that you want to plug or anybody you want to shout out?
No, we should be pretty good.
All right, sounds good. Well, I guess first things first, kind of like maybe a little more like fun kind of question thing. Like, does it all feel weird to be on like the other side of the interview?
I know it's been kind of crazy. I've had a couple of different ones in the past year or so, but I mean, honestly, just ultimately, whenever it's talking about basketball, is really just the fun part. So kind of get used to that, but I took some adjusting time from the very beginning one for sure.
Yeah. And then I guess a question, even though like it's pretty basic, like I try to ask more different kinds of questions, but I just love hearing everyone's story. So just kind of what got you started with all this?
Yes, it's kind of a crazy journey, but I grew up playing basketball for pretty much my entire life from I think second or third grade, and I played all the way up through high school up until about my junior years when I ended up stopping. But basically, kind of keep it a little bit short. But I got pretty sick during my middle school years, and I ultimately could have potentially still got continued playing the game of basketball if I wanted to, but I pretty much missed about 50-ish days of school between seventh and eighth and freshman year, and obviously that means I wasn't playing basketball much too. So I fell behind a little bit there and still had effects from being sick. But ultimately, it just came to a point where I knew I always either wanted to be an NBA GM someday or pursue sports media. And obviously, there's not too many NBA GM jobs or front office things until you're past college and have internships. So I pretty much got as far as I could. I got to know a few different GMs in the NBA. But from there, I'm like, okay, I have a few more years to really decide what do I want to do. And I ultimately chose to go the route of pursuing just media wise, kind of testing out, just kind of growing in that aspect. And from there, kind of just grew to where I'm at right now.
Yeah. So I guess before we kind of like continue on, are you kind of like only pursuing the media goal for now, or are you still between the two things and you'll just see wherever God takes you?
So yeah, I mean, obviously, still obviously praying on that, but ultimately, right now, I think my main majority thing will be all towards media. For college, right now, I'm going through becoming a sports management, so it kind of keeps the option open because knowing a few guys in the media, ultimately for those type of jobs, you can have a scholar like they kind of want you to have a degree to an extent, but for that, it's the majority of the time it's just basically looking at who's more talented, who's going to give us the most views and whatnot for an ESPN or CBS Sports, Fox Sports have a job. So for that, it doesn't necessarily they don't really care about what your degree is in too much. But for GM, obviously, it's a lot more financial stuff. They more want you to have some form of knowledge in that area. So that's something that I always kept open, kind of knowing that if I have a degree, that's all that this media side going to really care about, so I can pursue that. But if God leads me down a different path, I'll be prepared for that aspect too.
For sure. And if you could kind of bring this up, I mean, I don't know how hard or easy it is, but you did say you spoke to a couple like NBA GMs. So that sounds, at least in my opinion, like that sounds very, very cool and something that I'm assuming
Mhm.
is difficult unless it's surprisingly super easy. Like, how are you able to kind of get those opportunities?
Yeah, so it's been a few of them that's actually been really just kind of helpful throughout the whole thing, even as I've gone down the media aspect. But it kind of started back. So I'm obviously in Arizona, and the summer league's really close for the NBA. It's right there in Vegas, so it's about a 4 hour drive. So it kind of became a tradition that my brother, my dad, and I always would head out to Vegas for the first weekend of it, go for that Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and sometimes Monday. And obviously, at those experiences, like you have all the NBA players, obviously. I mean, most people that know basketball typically would watch the summer league, see the rookies, but that's obviously one part. I got to meet a lot of players. But for me, especially at that time, that was the main thing I was pursuing. Obviously, was intrigued to see the guys in the NBA, the guys like Sean Marks, the guys like all the GMs, to try talking to them. So got to have a couple different conversations. We've actually got to meet pretty much all of them at some point because they're not too many people don't obviously know who the GMs are, so they're not as
Yeah.
busy as per se the players. But a couple of them actually reached out more and was kind of gave me the contact info and helped me. One of which is Charlotte's GM, Mitch Kupchak. I've got to talk to him a lot. He obviously he's helped me probably the most, I'd say. Then Colby Altman out there in Cleveland, I've talked to him quite a bit. Bob Myers with Golden State. I've got to talk to quite a few people within the Phoenix front office, from James Jones and Trevor Buckstein, obviously from being from Arizona. Orlando Magic, I've got to meet a couple of guys in their front office. Those are pretty much the guys I've got to have contact with and either email with, talk on the phone with, that kind of stuff. So that's really been how I create those relationships.
Yeah, and I guess I kind of wish I mean I haven't gone to like a live I guess NBA sporting event in a while, so it's but
Mhm.
now I kind of realize because like what you said, those people are pretty accessible because no one really knows who they are. So I'm thinking if I ever go to a Heat game again, I'm somehow like there super early and I go to like the lower bowl and like you'll see people. If I see like anybody basically wearing like a Heat thing that's like down there, like I'm probably gonna start speaking to them because just having some connection to the league is obviously a big deal. But my one awkward thing is it's like actually funny story. I actually met the University of South Florida head men's basketball coach and had no idea. I thought he was an assistant coach the whole time. Had no idea he was the head coach. So that was like obviously like probably not going to be friends with him or anything like that. But it was a pretty like I was almost embarrassed for myself like how I had no idea. So how'd you really know like these people are the GMs? Like did you just Google search like how they all looked or because I feel like that's super awkward when you're talking to people and that's one of my biggest things is it's like I will only approach players to interview them in person if I know for a fact who they are because I feel like that's so awkward when you think they're someone else and they're not.
Yeah, so for me, I've been someone that for some reason I'm not able to memorize all different things. There's some areas I don't have the best memory in, but when it comes to basketball, for some reason, God just gives me the ability to pretty much memorize any players, any GMs, just pretty much off the back. And the first time I think was fourth or fifth grade. That was I think yeah, fourth grade. I've always had like these little journals when I was growing up that I'd create rosters and mock drafts and pretty much build rosters, do redrafts, put together the different trades, and all the kind of stuff I put in journals growing up and did that during class and stuff like that. But I kind of started memorizing since fourth grade. I knew the entire NBA rosters top to bottom and the GMs and pretty much what they look like and the owners and salaries and everything. And I still, obviously, I shocked pretty much everyone in my life that knew about that. But kind of just was imprinted in my mind. Like I've always kept up with that, kind of just known who they are. So in that aspect, I was always pretty familiar with all of them.
Yeah, that's crazy how you have that. Like, I know for me, I almost feel like, my memory is definitely, I feel like it's gotten a little bit worse. Like, now I actually have a calendar right here because I literally, like, at a certain point or another, I wasn't doing, like, probably as many interviews as you were per day, but still, like, I was
Mm-hmm.
also going to school every day, like, normal hour school, and then having to remember all this stuff. Like, I would forget so many things. So now I got to have a calendar. And it's crazy the amount of names. Like, I'll be in my room, like, thinking about basketball, and then I'm like, what was that player's name? And I'm like, I forgot. Like it is insane how much stuff I now forget now the more because there's just so many people out there. Like there's I don't know for me I just can't do it. But I was continuing on with that. What would you say? Like again, not like a basic interview question, but what was maybe your favorite interview that you've had?
Man, that's pretty tough. I mean, there's different things. I'd say personally, the biggest one or biggest achievement was my Instagram live with Mo Spates from the Warriors. And I think
Mhm.
obviously, like, it kind of breaks it down. I mean, there's so many different ways to break that question down. I don't think I can say one. I think when you look at the ultimate goal for me is being involved in ESPN, Fox Sports, one of those type of things. And that's obviously going to be majority of the time covering NBA stuff. So obviously, just getting to talk to an NBA player, especially someone as accomplished as he was, guy that's an NBA champion, a guy that's played 13 years in the NBA or more than that. Like that's something that obviously won the championship in college. Like that's something that was a pretty big achievement. He was a super cool guy. So I talked to him today. A couple of the NBA guys, Trevion Graham, he played at Brooklyn and played with Atlanta Hawks and Charlotte Hornets. A couple different guys like that. Zylan Cheatham from the Pelicans and Thunder. There's a couple different guys. Like just getting to talk to NBA players is obviously always something great. So those ones are kind of special in that aspect. Also, got to know a lot more of the college stars and college players have been doing more of recently. And high school, I mean, there's quite a few good guys that you can have on. That pretty much majority of guys, I'd say almost all high school guys are good kids. I mean, they're always fun. They're kind of growing in it, but obviously different levels. Guys that have more of a story to tell that have played this game for 15 plus years and that are in the NBA or for 8 or more years in college. Like it's just that they have more of a story to tell. Versus than the guys in high school that's been playing for 5, 6 years. So it kind of just breaks down. I mean, it's kind of a tough question, but those are some of the highlight ones I have to say.
Yeah, that definitely is like a good point you made because I even think of that, and I don't think I've interviewed anyone in the NBA, but that does make a lot of sense because they have gone through a lot more. So it's like if you ask the high schooler the same question, they only know depending on what grade they're in, like they might only know what middle school is like. But then for the NBA people, they really experience the whole thing. So that was definitely
Yeah.
a good point. Yeah. And then I guess I feel like I could kind of like I know the answer to this question, but it's more for if there's anybody else out there, like the young and up and comer interviews. There's definitely been a couple coming up now since you started doing this. I guess including myself as well. But what would you say is like your interview style?
Yeah, so actually, I kind of went back and forth a couple of different ways of doing interviews throughout the past 2, 3 years now. Me doing this, but I'd say the biggest way now I've kind of gone through is more of a storytelling type of situation. I kind of like just hearing guys' stories. Like I said, especially the guys in college or the NBA levels. Like I said, high school they don't have too much of a story yet, so I more talk about recruiting aspects. If they've committed, obviously go through the whole recruiting and committing process in their school. I also talk about high school to an extent, but those ones are a little more back and forth. But I'd say for the college ones, the biggest ones I've been focusing on the past few months. Those ones are really like going through the whole journey, talking about just growing up wherever they grew up in, talking about their high school career, going through the recruiting process, going to college, and a lot of these guys have been transferring now, obviously. So you talk about the transfer portal, obviously moving to different situations, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the way I like to go through, kind of just letting guys tell their story.
Yeah, actually, that was not. I'm not gonna lie. I wasn't even thinking that. I was thinking more just like I feel like there's like a conversational interview, then there's more like just question answer kind of thing. But that I actually really like that, like the storytelling atmosphere kind of thing. And I see, some of your questions, of course, like there's only so many questions you could ask players that are unique. Like some of them, like
Mm-hmm.
I know you always ask that one, like the top five stuff and all that. But then also
Mm-hmm.
like I would see some of your questions are like insanely unique. Like I think you asked it was either the guy got like kidnapped or something like that. Like you've asked
Mm-hmm.
some like I guess very interesting stuff. So are those things like do you just do crazy research and somehow find out about that, or is it more just they said it in the interview, then you just ask it as a follow up?
Yeah, so they're different guys. I think some of them, for example, Nashawn Bones Highland, who just for starters, he's something special. Obviously, he was at VCU last year, A10 Player of the Year. I personally would think they would have been on a nice little tournament run had they not got COVID, but he's got to be one of the more unique stories. His was obviously he grew up in Delaware, which is not known as one of the best places to grow up in. And he grew up in the projects in a certain area where his entire building burned down and he lost a couple of different family members in that situation. And he survived by jumping out the window. And that's something that obviously at that point he got injured and stuff like that, lost family members. And that was back his junior year of high school. It wasn't quite known yet. Like I said, he kind of pushed him into becoming the guy who was a senior year, became a top 100 recruit, and the rest is history. Now he's going to be a first round pick this year. But those kind of stories, I mean, some guys like him kind of kind of pointed out before we started, he want to talk about that. But for a lot of it, I kind of knew, I kind of researched him for stories like that. They're pretty vocal out there. But that's kind of something I do enjoy, to be honest. I like researching guys, and majority of college guys have some form of story, even if it's not something as insane as that past one. Like a lot of guys have crazy journeys that get you to this point. So pretty much everyone has some form of something that happened in their life. So kind of just trying to find a way to get to that is how I kind of like to rock and roll.
And a question like that is obviously something that's probably I would feel like a pretty sensitive topic. That's something I almost try to stay away from. Is not because I'm like I'm a disrespected interviewer, so people won't answer that question to me. But it's more like I don't want to ask someone a question where I feel like it could maybe make them cry or like feel sad. Like I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't. Maybe I'm like too scared to do it. Like I feel like I don't have the courage to do that stuff. So how do you I guess feel comfortable asking those really touchy questions?
Yeah, that's something I kind of was going back and forth on too when I first started it. I didn't really do too many of them. I'm trying to think when the first one was that actually went more in depth into a story. Not exactly sure. I think it was more like maybe a year ago, but if not, it was like 6 months or so. It was right after I started doing going to YouTube for my interviews, and at that point, kind of just like I want to kind of get my own thing, and you kind of watch more of the professional ones that are going down, and you kind of have to hear like they have a story, and a lot of guys are open to it. Like at some point, guys want to share their story, especially once they made to a college level or NBA level. And so, obviously, I said a lot of guys have that, and it just kind of getting them to talk about it. And sometimes they can get emotional about it. Sometimes they just enjoy it, kind of take pride in it. But either way, I always like if guys don't want to do it, obviously ask them beforehand, kind of go over the topics if we're going to do it. But I think at this point, I've got to where a lot of the college guys, especially, know what type of interviews I'm going to do. So they're kind of aware it's going to be more of that kind of situation. But overall, kind of just like you kind of feel uncomfortable in both aspects. Like I said, they always know beforehand. So that's kind of one of the biggest things that kind of made me feel more comfortable doing it.
Definitely. And I guess now we did talk about how like, what got you started doing this, but more the start of your interviews, like for me, how I kind of started was I think I interviewed like Greg Glenn, and then after him I interviewed like a few people that worked for like Slam and Overtime, and now like one of them works for like Ball is Life and that whole thing, is that I don't know the drama too much, but I just know like a little bit about it. Obviously we're not really involved in it because we don't make mixtapes, but now one of them like whatever, like all these big mixtape people, I started interviewing them in the beginning, and that's kind of what got my ball rolling. So, what were those first couple of interviews that you did that kind of then got you started like expanding and everything like that?
Yeah, I would say mine took a little bit longer than yours did. You start off obviously with the top 100, top 50 type of guy in Greg. But for me, it was really, like I said, it was kind of all of a sudden out of the blue. I just, one night, kind of, God led me to say, start doing a podcast stuff right now. And I listen back to every here and there, and it's pretty bad when I look back at it. But the first one, it was just talking about, it pretty much was just me talking sports and all. It was just a talk thing. And I had my brother on the very first one, and we just talked at the time. It was before the draft with Zion and RJ and all of them, so we are kind of debating who's be number one pick for that. And the interview lasted about 2.5 or 3 minutes. The second one was just with another friend from school. The third one, I can't remember. There weren't too many, but in the first 10 of them, I had a couple different people. One is I'm really close family friend with Mitch Lightfoot from KU. He was one of the mentors for me as a basketball player when I was heading into my freshman year. He was a senior at Gilbert Christian. So I had him on the fifth or sixth interview. I had Book Richardson right before the whole Arizona stuff happened with the paying allegations and whatnot. He's also a really close family friend. He's close to my brother growing up. So I've had him on, and then I'm trying to think of anyone else that was too big. I had Deron Holmes. I had a couple of Arizona guys started coming on later on because I grew up playing against guys like Ty Ty, Deron, a lot of the type of guys. So I had a lot of those guys I had on too. And those were really the big ones. But I would say like the one that really got me more on the national scene was Noah Dalen Terry. I had him on, and his connection to Compton Magic kind of led to a Compton Magic type series. So I was able to then get to know and interview Evan Mobley, Jalen Clark, obviously like I said DT with Dalen Terry, Isa Silva, Isaiah Mobley, pretty much anyone within that Compton Magic organization at that time. So I kind of just got to that really got me in the national scene because obviously interviewing the number one player in the country at the time, all those guys kind of put me on a national platform that helped kind of expand from there.
And I don't know if you consider yourself like this, but like, are you like, I guess because I think you are, unless like, I mean, I don't know too much of the history of this whole high school interviewing stuff, but at least in my eyes, like I consider you kind of the original, like you can almost say like the tipped and edits of the interview kind of stuff. So would you say like, is that, who you are, or was there even someone else before you that kind of, got it started and then you're just, a product of that person?
Personally, I don't know if there was anyone before me. I mean, it's hard to imagine that it wasn't guys that did some form of interviews out there. I mean, obviously, like, you kind of grew up seeing, like, the main reason I also kind of thought about this route in terms of high school was you always saw, like, the guys committing and stuff that would go on ESPN, but the guys that were ranked anywhere besides probably top 5, top 10 maybe,
Yeah.
we're not going to get on ESPN. Like, you'd see the Marvin Bagleys go out there. You'd see the Stanley Johnsons. I remember that one back in the day. You've seen some of those hat reveals, different interviews here and there. But that was like the top 5, top 10 guys. Like, those were the elite of the elite guys. And I feel like those guys have had the access and the platforms. But if you weren't in that top elite group, like, people weren't really getting to know you. So I would have to say, like, obviously besides those main things, like in terms of the IG live interviews, there's the personal sit down interview like this. Couldn't say. I mean, maybe there's been people, but personally, I kind of started on my own in terms of what I first thought.
Yeah, and yeah, I definitely agree with that. I just kind of wanted to make sure because I feel like for me, actually, I didn't even discover. Like, I think maybe after I don't know how exactly I discovered you. Actually, no, I didn't remember how. It was like after you did like you were like 100 or 1,000 interviews and you like tagged like a bunch of players. So a few of the guys I followed you did, and I saw it. I'm like, oh, who is this guy? And I'm like, oh, that's crazy. There's actually someone else doing this, and that's kind of how I found out. And like a lot of things, I guess I wouldn't say everything, but some of my strategies or tactics, like I've taken from you. So I would guess maybe I have it. There's obviously pros and cons to being the starter and kind of following up on somebody's success. So it's like, how'd you really just learn and grow where you don't really have anybody to, I guess, kind of like look up to and like follow in their own path like I did?
Yeah, I think that's kind of been something I've had trouble with because most of it has been self-taught. Like, I know obviously a lot of stuff that even we do, like people go to college for and take courses on. That's obviously not what I was doing. I started in high school. I know you did too. And for me, it's just kind of been learning. Like, I kind of always seen the vision. Like, I always want to be someone that ultimately is on an NBA TV show someday, has my own show on ESPN, Fox Sports, I've said before. So some capacity like that. And I kind of knew that was the ultimate goal, but somehow it's not just going to happen one day. I'm not just going to get offered some contracts. So I kind of knew what I wanted, but had to work to get to that vision. And ultimately, for example, like obviously the background for postings, like you just kind of had to make a vision and figure out how to do it. And it took a lot of time to figure out that stuff. It took a lot of time to figure out how to make connections with guys, how to do this and that. But ultimately, ultimately, it all was given to me by God. God helped lead me to each way, give me the feeling, kind of direct me in all these ways. But it kind of was just feeling it out, seeing the vision, trying to go grab it, and kind of grasp it and try to figure out how to get to those points.
Definitely. And I guess I want to ask, because some of the things that I've kind of taken away from you, I just want to maybe ask how kind of you came up with those ideas. So like one of them, I mean, like I feel like you don't do it as frequently, but like I remember when I was kind of getting into it, I'd look and see who you would tag in your posts, and it would be tons and tons of play. Or I guess there's only so many people you could tag. Like you would tag, a lot of people besides just the one player. So that really took away, and that was honestly like a key to my success as well. Like I would go interview the player, then scroll through like who follows them and see what players that aren't extremely big time but somewhat big time follow them. Then it would tag them, and hopefully they like the post. Then DM them. I'm like, yo, thank you for liking my post. Like, let's do an interview. And there you go. Like that was how like I expanded. And that was kind of all from you. So for like, how'd you get that idea to tag a lot of people in the posts?
Yeah, so if people always look back at the post, it's grown a lot since I first started. Like originally, I didn't even make clips. There was occasionally ones I would do it for, but it just wasn't that good. If anyone wants to go scroll it back to the beginning, people could see what I'm talking about. But I typically like post just the picture of when I released it, and the old pictures from when I used to have my podcast, which was Choose Views originally. The
Yeah.
pictures were not very good, but I just would usually post those, and then all of a sudden I'd say about a year ago, maybe a little more or less, I started making the posts and clips of them all where I'd make different things. And those have changed too drastically in the past year. But I kind of just went and decided off topics. I know obviously if you're talking about a different player, that tends to do a little bit better. So I kind of decided to start rolling with that and kind of figure out like what does work, what doesn't work. And I think overall you just kind of figure out, like I said, what works, what doesn't work in terms of that. And kind of decide like obviously the ones when people are talking about different players, whether that be teaming up or guy that just talking about a good player, like those tend to do better. So I just kind of kept rolling with that.
Yeah, and I'm curious because it's like, for me, I try to make every question I post usually different, because I do know that the back of my mind, like, because it's common sense. If I posted a clip where it's like you talking about this person, then it's so easy to get the other person involved because they see like, oh, I'm being talked about. Like that's awesome. Let me comment like, oh, like I love you, man. Like I like feel like it's kind of common sense. I'm like those are always going to do better. But then it's
Mm-hmm.
like I don't want to be known as the guy I just post the same clip of this guy talking good about this other guy, or stuff like that. So what's kind of, I guess, maybe your opinion on that, where it's going to do better, but also like you just don't want to do the same thing every single time?
Yeah, so I think there's a few different things that I kind of do, but are kind of typically around the same story. Like the main things you look for. I mean, obviously, I try to make at least one post for each interview, and you're gonna kind of decide. I mean, you're not just gonna post a random thing saying something that no one cares about. So I think there's a few different things that people really do. Like one of them, obviously, is if they have a crazy story, that's the one I'm gonna post, and that's one I love doing because those will do good. It's obviously sharing a guy's story. They want to be kind of take pride in that too. So those ones always do pretty well. Besides that, then I like doing lots like I'll ask them the top five or something like the ranking the dream team or something like that. Those ones I'll do every here and there. Also talking about what they expect for a team in the upcoming season. And then the player one. I think the player one is different. I mean, if you do the same guy talking about the same player over and over again, that might get a little pointless. But if you do it in terms of, I mean, if you have one guy here and another guy, like it's just constantly switching up who they're talking about. I don't think it's going to matter too much because it's still different, completely different guy. And I've always kind of looked at different podcasts or shows out there. Like you look at All the Smoke and you look at all the different podcasts that are happening. What are they obviously posting? I mean, they're obviously getting guys that are prestigious NBA players, so obviously those will do good no matter what. But you just kind of look at what are they talking about, and they tend to do different things that are kind of similar to it in a sense. So it's kind of just how to roll with that too.
Yeah, and then something else that I feel like is not a struggle, but it's almost maybe it kind of something I'm dealing with, because in the beginning, before I even knew you existed, I just reached out to like tons of people and just hope they got a response. But now like I'm starting to get at just like what players will probably respond and what won't. And I just don't feel like DMing like a guy. Like I'm not gonna DM Amani Bates because I have a good feeling that kid is never gonna see it, never gonna go into response. So something I did, is I would go to your profile. I think I actually one night, it was like 4 a.m. my time. I was like, up late. This was the beginning of everything, and I saw you posted a thing, an interview with like Pierce Thomas and like Brooks, whatever, Barnheiser or whatever. And so I saw you just posted two of those, and I reached out to both of them, and luckily both responded because I knew like, okay, I did an interview with you, then then they probably maybe do one with me because they obviously have to respond to your DM. So I guess how'd you find out about more and more guests since you weren't going to a profile like I was and seeing which guys would do interviews and which ones wouldn't?
So I personally just honestly, I just pretty much reached out to everyone out there at some point throughout all my journey of this. Like, I pretty much kind of decided like ultimately it may or may not. But we're never really gonna know who's gonna get back. So I pretty much I think at least reached out to everyone at least once that I have to say. And ultimately, like if you first, I still am kind of shocked that it happened. But for being, I think it was my 41st, something like that interview, I got Evan Mobley on the number one player, which obviously is different. That's probably not going to happen for most people. It's kind of a shock that he even did at that point. I guess it's more because of the Comps Magic connection there. But besides that, I mean, you kind of just like reach out and some guys might get back. I mean, there's going to be guys that tend to be more shy that might be in the top 10, top 15, or even the top 80. And so you don't really know exactly who's going to and who's not. So I just kind of reach out to pretty much everyone. And ultimately, it takes some time. Like once you start building out, more guys know who you are. They'll be more open to it. So that's pretty much, I think that's more the biggest thing is just getting your name out there more and more well known. More guys will kind of be more open to doing the interview.
Mhm. And something for me, like, so since I said before the interview, like I leave on Friday, so I obviously am not going to reach out to a lot of people. But as
Mm-hmm.
much as like, for some reason, like it's not addicting, but it's like if I always find out like a new player and have a feeling they would do the interview, like it's hard not reaching out, even when I know I don't have time to interview you. Like it's just so hard not trying to
Mm-hmm.
find out. So it's like, do you reach out? Let's say like like you're like, all right, today I'm only going to reach out to 10 players and we'll see who responds, or do you literally just go everybody and then have to kind of make a whole big long schedule of what to do?
So for me, I remember during high school time, like I said, I've really transitioned a lot more to college guys. I do for more commitment stuff now
Yeah.
for high school, but that one honestly I found is a lot easier. I think, well, I'll be honest, like for high school when it's commitment time, I'll do a lot of interviews, like I said. That can be simple because if a guy commit, that's more likely they're gonna want to do an interview to talk about that.
Mhm.
And like a lot of time, like if you do an underclassman, they'll be more open to do it anytime if they want to do the interview at all, for starters, of course.
Mhm.
But once they get to the junior year is like the hardest year for high school to do it because and it kind of is difficult too. It's like, okay, they're either cut down the list, you're gonna talk about 10 or 15 schools or whatever the list is, or they're got 100 offers on the table right now. What do you talk about because they haven't cut down? And a lot of them they're not even always wanting to do it yet because they're focused on this recruiting process. They're traveling now for visits, they're doing all this stuff. So that makes it difficult. But once they're committed, it's kind of like simple. Like you kind of keep a schedule, a tracker, like, okay, this guy just commit here, let's kind of keep asking him. Let's get him on eventually because I'm sure he's probably if he's agreed, obviously he wants to do it at some point. So that kind of sets it up easier that way. For college, I've really just kept a schedule because each guy's kind of on their own timeline, right? Like because right now guys are transferring, guys are coming back to schools, guys are declaring for the draft, guys are coming back. Like college is always something happening. Like even if it's someone that is an up and coming freshman, had a good season off the bench last year, and a guy that was starting in front of them might have just transferred out, a guy in front of them might have just declared for the draft or something like that. Now it's even news for them now because now people know, okay, this guy's most likely going to become a starter now. So college has been a lot easier, in my opinion, because you can track it all a lot easier than high school is. Obviously, there's hundreds of thousands of kids playing high school basketball out there. You're not going to know every guy on every roster except for the
Yeah.
IMGs, the easy compasses. So that's really made it more easier in the college aspect. But I'd say just really seeing what's current updates, and that's really the easiest way to keep track of that.
And something else too is it's like there'll be some guys where I could be luckily, fortunately, they just keep responding. Like I could be going months. Like the guy I interviewed before you today. Today's
Mm-hmm.
actually one of my more busier days. I'm supposed to be doing three, but we'll see because the guy's always full. So at the moment, supposed to be doing at least no, sorry, at least four today,
Mm-hmm.
but hopefully probably three. But anyways, it's like this guy. I did an interview with him ages ago. But then I guess I asked him like a question. It wasn't a bad question, but I guess reportedly like you're not allowed to talk about it. And he didn't know, and I didn't know. So his coach watched the whole interview and said, because this one question, like we got to delete the whole thing. So whatever. So that was maybe in like October, November. And
Mm-hmm.
finally today in June now, we were finally able to do the interview. And luckily he was a nice guy and just kept on responding to me. And we just kept staying in touch. But of course, I feel like for a lot of guys, more like a hit or miss opportunity. Like, for example, actually with Eric Daly Jr., who I interviewed, he was posting like, I want to play, like, let's play 8 ball, let's play 8 ball, whatever. And I'm pretty solid at 8 ball on my phone. So I kept saying like I'll play you if I win. Like, can we do an interview? He said, fine, sure. Luckily, I won. He choked actually, so I was very lucky. But so that's like a hit or miss opportunity kind of thing. So when you're talking to these players, are a lot of them you reach out and then interview them like months and months later, or do you more just do it like almost as soon as you reach out to them and do them very recently?
I'd say it depends, like you said, on players. Obviously, each guy's got their own way of life. There are some
Mhm.
guys that are a lot more difficult to get on than others. Personally, for me, I like being more recent because overall, once again, the college aspect is it's heavily, heavily covered. So if you do an interview right away with someone that just did some form of movement, that tends to do a lot better than if you do it even a week later. Because even a week later, there's gonna be many more articles out there. There's gonna be
Mhm.
maybe an interview out there. So those kind of become not as possible, not as popular, obviously. So it really depends on that. I prefer to do it as quickly as possible, obviously. And for a lot of guys, I would say that's the case. Like a lot of guys are down to do it. Some guys, a lot of them, even for high school, have been doing pre-recorded ones. Like they'll do the interview with me before they commit, and I just drop it as soon as they announce it. I did. I think I've done 22 of those now. I'm planning to do a lot more 2022 class now too, but those ones kind of depend on that. Also, if guys just want to commit, we do it that night right after they announce it. We do an IG live right after they announce it, or we just do it sometime the next week. That's typically what a lot of guys do. But there are guys that have busy schedules or something comes up and they just can't do it for a long time, and that does occur for a good amount too, though.
Yeah. And I guess, man, I completely lost my oh yeah, all right. So I know because the one thing for me is it's like, again, like I have I mean, so you do college like it's like online stuff, right? So you kind of get to
Mhm.
pick your own hours, I assume.
Yeah, so that's one thing. Kind of even before COVID, I know a lot of people always say like, "Did COVID affect this?" And it kind of was been my dream since sophomore year, honestly. So yeah, I
Mhm.
kind of just do my hours whenever I want for college.
Yeah, and yeah, Corona was definitely like, luckily for me, that was very, very helpful because a lot not, people were pretty not busy. So that was obviously, I
Mhm.
feel like, extremely helpful for probably you and for me. But now things are, so I feel, I mean, things aren't still normal, but it's like there's now more extracurricular activities going on. So like for me, I'm my school's manager. I'm not good at basketball, so I'm
Mhm.
their manager and everything. So like during the season, like I was insanely busy, so I wasn't doing an interview, at least one interview every day, or doing a lot every day like you. So it's been tough for me to kind of schedule them and everything. So would you really say that I guess maybe now recently it's more easier for you to schedule since you have, I guess, maybe the same amount of time, but more you could pick your time with school and pick your time with this. So is that kind of like a big factor to why you're able to do so many interviews and kind of make the scheduling a little bit easier?
Oh yeah, most definitely. I started this obviously back in high school, so I had to go through my junior and senior year or this, I guess I was only a quarter my junior year and then senior
Mhm.
year of dealing with the whole school schedule. And thankfully, my senior year I had a lot of credits done, so I got out of school at 11 o'clock. But even then, like I do interviews in the morning, so that's opened up, and then you still have homework and all that stuff. But online, ever since COVID has set in, like that fourth quarter of my senior year, and then since that point, obviously it's been pretty much just easy. Like I do my homework and schoolwork late at night, typically around 11 ish, 11:30. Just once
Mhm.
the whole day is pretty much done, I just do a couple of minutes here and there. But overall, like, I can do the whole day. I always keep it open, so I'm pretty much flexible. So yeah, definitely would say online has been huge for me.
And I feel like these, like, I don't know kind of what your exact setup is like, but for me, I have like a ring light right in front of me. Like, I put out its
Mhm.
lowest brightness because I think it's crazy bright. Like, just staring at my computer, then having this light on me, like, the stuff gets tiring. And especially now, my interviews are now mostly starting to go at least half an hour long, luckily.
Mhm.
But so it really gets like excruciating. So do it all start to get like just extremely washed out after doing a bunch of interviews? That's like how I feel like after doing like a super long one, just do it like stare at this light the whole time. Like I just get like exhausted after.
Yeah, I think it honestly you kind of get conditioned to it over time. You get used to
Mhm.
it more and more. Personally, for me, I haven't told too many people about this publicly and all that, but I do have ADHD too. So it's
Mm.
been crazy. I don't know how it works, but for some reason, like whenever you find something that you truly love and enjoy, you're able to lock into it. Like I can't sit still or stand still. I have to always talk and walk typically. But all of a sudden, when I do an interview, I just am able to sit down, chill, and just lock into something. I don't know what it is. Obviously, it's led by God once again. I don't know where it kind of comes from, but it just kind of happens. You kind of lock in. I think if you do so many, obviously you do kind of get tired at different points. You
Yeah.
get thirsty, maybe get hungry, but I think over time your body kind of gets conditioned to it and kind of gets used to it.
Yeah, I think also maybe a slightly big factor is even though you're a pretty big time person like in the high school basketball world, it's like when you're talking to to Evan Mobley or something like that, I mean, maybe it's almost like you don't want him to think like this guy's like an idiot, like walking around and like you're like actually. I sometimes have. I don't think I have ADHD, but I don't know. I guess you could say I get bored a lot sometimes. So actually, I had like a fidget spinner like right next to me. I just be like playing with it the whole time. Or I have like this thing. Actually, I have this paperweight. It's like a basketball. So I would like drop it like during the interview, like a big bang, and I would just do it. But yeah, this stuff definitely gets pretty long for sure. But I do think though, like having I don't want to walk around my room right now like do anything stupid like with you watching me. So maybe that could be at all a factor why. But I guess I'm curious with the interviews. Like for me, I guess I'm still working on my craft and everything. Like, see, I stopped. I remember when I just started, I was having all these questions. Now I'm doing everything off the top of my head, and I'm trying to make things a little more conversational. So that's kind of like an interview goal of mine. So what kind of interview skills are you working on right now that you're trying to perfect in these interviews?
Yeah, so there's obviously still so much room for growth. Like there's obviously simple things like you'll mess up here and there that ultimately I said once again, my dream job of being on ESPN, like they do mess up. Obviously no one's gonna be perfect, but it's very minimal. Like you'll hear them mess up maybe once an episode. That's probably even rare for that to happen. Like you're not gonna have them stutter or missay something, maybe not use the right terms. Like obviously always improving a dictionary, using the bigger and better words. It's something I was like improving on, kind of reading on more words to better use words, word choices to use. Obviously, there's different moments where you kind of stutter, maybe you forget what you're saying at different times. Um, I've got a lot better, like obviously keeping eye contact stuff. That was something I worked on before, removing different like the buts, the ifs, like that kind of stuff, removing that. Um, Pretty much that's some of the biggest things. I think there's obviously, like I said, so much room for improvement. And ultimately, eventually, when the day does come, it's going to be even more different. Like, ultimately, I'm trying to work on someday moving to more in person interviews because there's going to be times you do stuff on the TV and all, but you're going to be always be the one in person with the camera on you. So that's going to be a whole different scene. Obviously, this is from the shoulders, the waist up type of situation. Like, you're not going to
Mhm.
have the full everything. So, kind of learning and practicing as if you're in that situation as best you can is something I was trying improving on too for the ultimate goal eventually being on TV or something like that.
Yeah, and that is definitely like it is because technically it's an interview, like in person or
Mhm.
online. But the way I do these online interviews is a completely different thing from the way I do my in person interviews. Like there's things that I watch my online interviews and I'm like, man, like this is so bad. And there's like a completely different thing that I'm doing in my in person interviews that I'm like I gotta change this up. Like they're definitely two different worlds. But actually, a question that I feel like it's not like the best thing for this interview, but it was something that I was thinking of. Like I know you were at that Pangos camp and everything. And I mean, for me, like if I was there, like I would be interviewing everybody. Like why I'm curious why you didn't choose to, kind of do any interviews there since basically every top player was in that one gym.
Yeah, so my way of doing it, like personally for me, I'm more of a guy that do sit down interviews. I don't like that's personally for me, like obviously I know you do a lot of the in person ones, like talking about the game, like quick little minute, 2 clip minute ones. That's something obviously I love how guys do that. That's obviously a huge career doing silent report and different stuff like that. My thing is I've always like my personal love is just truly getting to know a guy's story, background, in that kind of situation. And you're not probably gonna do that after a game or after something like that for a 30, 45 minute sit down or sit down right after a game. So the way I typically go, and at that point in time, like that was a 2021 guys, so I think there was 40 something guys at the camp, whatnot. I knew already about 35 of those guys. I've already interviewed them, so that kind of was a more familiar place. At that camp, though, like I would go up to each one of the guys, and I'll just talk to them if I already knew them. But I didn't know yet. I
Mhm.
just kind of would talk to them and say, "Hey, want to do the interview? Set it up sometime, exchange phone numbers, and get that locked in." That's what I did. That's how I got the Paul Banchero one.
Yeah.
Um, what other one did I get from that one?
I'm
Gonta,
thinking Josh
Gonta.
too.
What was that? Oh yeah, Josh Monat. Yep, that's how I got to know him. I got to know Chet that time. Um, I think that was the rest of the guys I pretty much knew who they were. Oh, Hersey Miller. So some of the guys that I kind of got to know at that camp I didn't know prior to that. So that's kind of more the way I do. Like I was just like taking in a game. I love the game of basketball, so I like watching it there. And I'll just go like make the connection if I don't know them already.
Yeah, I think though actually I don't know. Do you know who Kristen Peak is?
Yep.
Yeah, so I did an interview with her. I think that's actually going to be the clip I'm going to post from her interview. But like she was talking because of course for me like I would love to expand to doing a longer interview. But at the same time, like if I go to a game, I'm not going to now have them like sit around for 30 minutes in person, like because that's inconvenient for everybody. So you're not
Hmm.
going to do that. But I guess what she did say, and I feel like that camp maybe snag a couple players, is she would go to these practices or like a summer league game, and obviously it's all planned. Like you don't ask them the day of, and then that's where they kind of do it because they're not like upset about losing a game or anything like that. So I think I mean, more than I do, but definitely I think next time it can be something you could probably do for sure. But I feel like though the one thing is that takes a lot of like logistics in terms of camera, chairs, set up,
Hmm.
all that stuff. So that might take a lot of time until you get like actually hired with the whole crew and stuff like that probably.
Yeah, and that's something too. I was is honestly, I probably would have done something like that during that because obviously my house wasn't too far away. I was at Easy Compass, which is where my brother's at too. So
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't necessarily something that I was kind of wanting to do at that point in time. It was I don't even know what was that. It was a year ago, so I think it was probably August, September, whatever it was. That was still pretty heavy with the COVID stuff, and
Yeah.
um, that was something that's kind of difficult. Like doing ones where you do the full sit down. Obviously, no one wants to do an interview with mask on, sit down person to person. So
Mm-hmm.
that was something that you weren't probably going to do. I know most guys weren't comfortable yet, or at least public weren't going to say, okay, let's do an interview without a mask on right now. So that was
Mm-hmm.
something that was kind of difficult. But I remember there was, my brother also was on Vegas Elite for AEU. And at that point, it was heading right before COVID set in. So it was that kind of springish time. And so you had Jaden Hardy, you had Pop Up Isaacs, which is how I got to know him. You had all those guys in that organization, Jay Gupp, a lot of those guys were with them at that point and Julian Strawler. And I was going to even talk to them. Like we had it all set up. I was going to go with Ball Dogs. I've got to know them. So shout out to them. Obviously, they're huge what they're doing. And I've
Yeah,
got
no,
to
that's great.
know them. They've kind of been with them since they first started. We both kind of got to know each other at the same time. And they were going to start filming it for me and help me out when we went out there. And then that first weekend we went out there for his first training camp was about a month before game started. That was the first that Monday is when things shut down. So we went out that Friday and we were really in Vegas during the course of everyone, the news trying trickling out. And by the last day we were out there, no one was in the hotels anymore. We were one of the last people in the city and the entire strip in that area. So we always had to shut that down, cancel all the interviews from that aspect, and we haven't got back to it yet. Most of it, I think once things keep settling down, obviously, if there was a big Pangos camp right now back in Arizona or something, I'd probably do it or something like that. But that's definitely something I want to eventually get into more.
Yeah, and I feel like though, I mean, for me, I guess like I get nervous for a lot of things, not when I do the interviews, but more
Mhm.
before them. I'm like, what if the guy folds or what if he's like mean? So that's kind of what I get more nervous about. But it's like I feel like doing a long interview like this, a sit down one in person, because I feel like at home, I'm kind of in the comfort of my desk. Like I'm used to sitting here all day. I have like a paper in front of me. If a thought comes in my mind, I want to write it down. But it's like in person. Well,
Mhm.
actually, no, because I just remember. I guess it makes it a little easier too. Is you just kind of cut and paste a lot of things. So you could even go question, all right, good, stop, and then do it again, which probably makes it a little helpful. But I feel like having
Mhm.
to sit down and be because I feel like I'd be a little more relaxed when I'm online. But if I'm in person, you got to basically be 100% like camera ready for let's say a 40 minutes straight. So are you maybe at all nervous? Because I feel like that's a whole other level of like endurance you'll need to have is be on camera for that long period of time and you cannot change like your demeanor whatsoever.
Yeah, I think that's something I know. One aspect too is that they cut off a lot of time. Like they're not typically going to show two face. Like, you kind of where the faces is, so that might be something that's a little easier. But thankfully, one thing I will say too, it's always been a blessing from God once again, is that personally, I don't really have any fears. Like I've never been something like I got nervous before things. Like that's something I've always like. I've been the guy since I was in like a talent show. I was in like second or third grade. I was in that pretty much every year for different stuff in elementary school. I always was the one that wanted to present randomly, and I was a kid that was just wanted to present whatever the teacher wanted for whatever reason that was. And I just don't know, like, it's something I've always naturally loved to do, just speaking in front of people. Didn't care how many people were out there. I've always kind of been someone that was just gifted with that aspect. So I wouldn't say the nervous aspect would be as applied for me in that aspect, but like I said, there's kind of the little itty bitty things that you don't necessarily think of. And when you watch a professional do it, it really doesn't make you think about it because they don't do it. That's just simple stuff like obviously, how do you hold in a yawn if you accidentally have that? How do you potentially highlight different things with the camera on you? So that's probably like the biggest thing, but overall, you just kind of figure that out over time, I guess.
Yeah, and that's actually kind of funny you bring that up because for me, actually, so I'm the same way. Like, I always love presenting to my class. Like, we'll be on online school, and there'll be like a few kids in class, and my teacher will be like anyone at home, like, you guys got anything to say? Like crickets, and I'll be like, I'll just say something just because I enjoy talking. But I'm hoping you didn't see this. I went live with Paulo Banchero, very bad, very embarrassing. Really hope you didn't see it because I feel like an Instagram live, the one tough part, and I wasn't even looking at the comments, but it's more knowing that people are commenting about you while it's going on. Because if I'm, let's say I was doing an interview with you in front of 200,000 people and they're all like in an arena, but then it's like you're not seeing what they're saying. You probably don't even notice they're there because like all like the bright lights and everything. But it's like doing an Instagram live where you're seeing those comments, or you're at least knowing that people are typing things about you that could not be so nice. Like at the moment, how have you maybe worked on that? Where kind of having that thought where people are literally commenting about you, like as you talk, and you just look down real quick, and you're gonna see it all.
Yeah, so that's another thing that's kind of funny about me too. I know when I first started off, obviously back when quarantine first, I think I was one of the first guys that did like the IG live sessions and stuff
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
that.
'Cause I have
Mhm.
scrolled down to the bottom of your page actually, so I've seen like you did a more Instagram lives and just mashed them together in the beginning.
Mhm. So like when I was doing those, I remember like in the very beginning, like I'd have however many viewers, obviously depends on who you bring on and whatnot. Each
Hmm.
one of those, there's different times that would come up and people would start doing different hating stuff, whatever it would be. And I know my mom watched some of them, my brother did, and they'd be like asking me like, what's your thoughts on this? And they just start going back. Even my brother would be funny sometimes go back with different guys. But personally for me, I don't once again it's kind of a weird thing about me, but I kind of like when it happens for a couple reasons. One, I kind of just like, I don't know, it just makes me more motivated in a way. I kind of just like it. I don't know what it is. I just kind of enjoy it. And secondly, I think the way, if you look at it smartly, is if someone's saying something negative, obviously if it's just like you suck or something, that's whatever. But a lot of times if it's different, sometimes it will be stuff that they're hating on. But if you look at it, you can kind of see what they might be hating about. And if it's something like that, you can kind of learn from it and say, okay, well, maybe it's something, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but maybe I should check myself. Maybe I look to improve and just see what makes it better. And maybe sometimes if it is just pure random hate, whatever, I don't really care about it. But honestly, for me, like I said, the biggest thing is I just kind of, for some reason, embrace it. I love kind of the hate. I love seeing stuff like that. And for some reason, just makes me kind of, I don't know, either laugh at it or just get motivated mid interview. So that part actually wasn't too big of a thing for me either.
Yeah, so something I actually did for the first time yesterday, because I'm sure you've had it like, and I doubt you've had any like extremely like crazy like rude comments, but I'm sure you've had some comments, maybe not about you, but about certain players, like, oh, this guy, like transferred to this school, like, shit like that. This happened to me yesterday because this is the first time I actually responded to, I guess, a hater. The guy said should have stayed at this school, and I said, like, regardless, you gotta respect his decision either way. Like, I think it was a great move though. He's gonna get tons of exposure. And the guy says, like, yeah, good for him. He's going to a school that cheats. And I was like, summertime, let me respond for the first time. And I was going to delete it all after.
Mm-hmm.
But so I was like, oh, like whatever, like I'm glad you're hating on a high schooler, like have enjoy your night, whatever. And the guy responds like, oh, you're just, like the kiss up to the school. And I forgot what I said after that. Nothing vulgar, but that was like my first time doing that. And it was slightly enjoyable, I have to admit. But then I deleted it all obviously because I don't want that up there. And there's a small chance that important people are viewing that at that moment. So assuming it
Mm-hmm.
was okay. But for you, like since you said you enjoy the hate and kind of embrace it, how like so what do you do when you see those comments kind of hitting on a kid, or maybe making fun of you on your literal posts?
So, so for me, like a lot. Oh, one
Yeah,
sec.
yeah, yeah. I always drink my water. Like I keep it very casual, so it's no it's
Mhm.
no big deal.
So yeah, so like a lot of time for me too, like in that aspect, I think guys too, for the most part, once again, I think younger guys, it might be the first time. So that might be tougher, but for a lot of guys, like it's gonna be something you have to get used to. So personally, I don't necessarily respond, especially mid interview or something like that. I probably wouldn't do it.
No, I'm saying like like in the comments of like
Oh,
like,
gotcha.
like on the literal post.
Okay, yeah, yeah. So for those, sometimes I don't, I think I've got back a couple different times, but sometimes it's just like if it's a guy, especially if it's a spam account that has like,
Oh
I
yeah,
don't know,
yeah.
like that's sometimes just like funny. But I think a lot of times guys ultimately just it's something that you're gonna get in pulled. Like if someone wants to go comment something about a guy, odds are that you're probably not gonna convince them another way. and potentially they even think that it was a good move. They just want to hate on it for whatever reason that is.
Mhm.
So I personally just kind of look at it like, okay, they can say what they want. Obviously, I can go back and forth if I really want to. I think the one biggest one I've had in terms of someone like truly the band actually took up and went into was it was quite a few months ago. It was about rankings. I had a little clip post about before, and kind of
Okay.
just discussing that. And it was someone supposedly from 247. I looked him up. He wasn't anywhere to be found there, but he said he claims he was. But he was kind of going back and forth to talk about that. And rankings is something that obviously I'm not very high, and I don't really care too much about that. I think
Mhm.
that rankings help in terms of our business, trying to find just get an idea of who could be good. Because obviously, if you're ranked, you're going to be a good player. But ultimately, like in terms of do rankings matter towards a player? Do they ranking towards how your career is going to pan out? Does it matter in terms of really anything regarding a player? Not really. I mean, it might affect them in terms of social status and followers and not. But if their main goal, which it should be, is play Division One and play pro, their rankings aren't going to impact that one bit. So there was someone that was commenting about why rankings matter a ton, why that should be something everyone focuses on, why team rankings for the college classes matter so much. And I was kind of going back and forth with that guy, but that's really the only time I think I can remember going back and forth with someone in the comments that wasn't too fond of what the post was about.
Yeah, and then just kind of a couple more questions before we finish the interview. So I guess one thing that I find maybe like slightly challenging, and I feel like also because there's no really technically real purpose for me to watch NBA or college games at the moment is because obviously a lot of guys I'm interviewing are in high school, so they're not there yet, and it's because
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing basketball stuff all day. Like so, I woke up, ate breakfast, did an interview, then I had to go to school for someone real quick, then went home, ate lunch. Now we're doing this interview. Then I'm probably gonna post an interview, then do another interview, then eat dinner, then I'm gonna go to a game. So that's basketball all day. So then I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna come home, watch the NBA playoffs. If the game's close, it's kind of hard not to watch. But if it's not
Mm-hmm.
close, really, I'm gonna probably like The Office or something like that probably. So it's like for me, it's been super tough all year, like following sports because I'm literally doing it all day. So for you, was that something you maybe like experienced in the beginning? You just didn't feel like watching these games because you really had no connection to the players. And I guess now, how much more enjoyable is it watching sports when you're watching guys that you've interviewed now play college basketball and all that stuff?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things. I'm glad you asked that too, because that's something that ultimately is a dream. Like you see almost in this aspect, like some of the guys you do get pretty close with, like some guys I would say I've become pretty close friends with. But like in terms of like the high school guys, like that one, like I said, was really hard because you don't really get to see everyone play. Like you obviously they could be all playing at the same time somewhere, and who knows where, and they could be playing high school games or wherever. So that one was really tough when I was heavily involved in high school to really like follow that heavily and still also manage NBA in college because I mentioned a few different times like that ultimately is my main goal is NBA, and right now it's pursuing college heavily. So that one was tough. Like I've always loved the game of college basketball. I love NBA basketball, and honestly, I've always loved it more than high school basketball. But it was tough. The first year or so, like it was kind of really hard to balance watching the NBA, watching college, and still maintaining the high school aspect. So I would say I've enjoyed. That's why I kind of gone more to college right now. Like I said, my goal has always been to really find that class. So it's kind of been between the 2019, couple guys in 2019, very very couple few guys, and then really up until now the 2024, 2025 class. Like that 6 year span really obviously is the next era of basketball. Like that's technically a generation of basketball. So my goal has always been really build a great connection with as many guys as possible in those classes and kind of watch them go into college and watch them in the NBA. Obviously, every guy you've been interviewing in high school is not going to play in the NBA. That's just end
Yeah.
of the day, that's the end goal. I know that's everyone's dream, but it's not going to happen. So you kind of hopefully just hit it on quite a few of them. In this upcoming draft, this trying to 2019, I think I only knew like 4 guys from it, so that wasn't too big. 2020, I knew a decent amount, more than I expected to, and especially now I've got to know them doing college stuff. But obviously, Evan Mobley hit, but that was kind of an obvious one. I knew that was going to happen. But I think I've got them all lined up now. I'm going to start doing them actually tomorrow. The NBA interviews, like getting ready for the pre-draft interviews. And I'm up to right now, I think 21 guys that are on mock draft, which is kind of shocking. Um, that's something that's going to be awesome to see them play in the NBA. I got to know a couple of guys in the NBA right now, but not too many that actually play a lot. But just like last year, just watching a lot of guys in college, I'm pretty close with Josh Primo in Alabama. Seeing him do his thing, now going through the NBA process, that's awesome to see. Devin Cambridge, I'm pretty close, really close with from on Auburn. that's great to see. Like there's a lot. The list kind of goes on though, but just kind of like you said, getting to go out there and watch guys play what they love to do, and kind of guys that you can support, truly support them, is awesome too.
For sure. And then something else too. So you did say the networking and everything, and that is just so important. But
Mm-hmm.
I feel like though, and I'm sure it probably is like this for you because you've talked to a lot of people. Like I'm surprised the amount of like I have very, very few, I would say, friendships with players that are not from like my area because I mean, unless because if you're not seeing them in person too often, like it's like you can only reply to their story so many times, be like, oh, good job, congratulations, like how are you? Because those conversations I have all the time, like, oh, hi, like checking in, how are you? Good. How are you? Good. Like, how's your season? Good. That's all he's saying. Like, that's basically can't really like force a conversation. So how have you been able to really build good, genuine relationships with guys, not from your area?
Yeah, so that's like obviously something that is kind of difficult too. I guess there's not a ton of guys I'd say that's the scenario with, but
Mm-hmm.
I said for starters, I would say like, just growing, like I say, playing in Arizona basketball. I played through. I'm not gonna say obviously I wasn't something special. I think maybe I could have made low major had I not got sick and continued playing. But like throughout middle school, our team rival to a sense was a time Rancho Solano, which is where Nico Mannion played at. We went against them all the time, and I had my career high in that game. Like I played against him. That team had a couple of D1 players. That and like I said, just growing up too. Like I've been on the same team and did different stuff growing up since I was. I mean, me and Ty Washington are the same exact age. He's a couple months
Yeah.
older than me. We grew up playing each other because Arizona basketball's not that big. You're in Florida, obviously, there's a lot more talent overall. Arizona's a pretty small, tight knit community. It's grown a lot recently with the prep schools coming in, but it's still like the foundation of guys born and raised in Arizona is a really tight, small circle. So we played against each other growing up since I was 5, 6, 7 years old. So I just knew him. I knew Dalen Terry. I knew Deron Holmes. All those guys, same story. And so you ultimately are traveling with them. You're playing different camps and all that, and they kind of introduce you to different guys. So that's how I got to know some of the College Magic guys too. Again, so that's how you form that bond. And then with other guys, like it kind of a lot of them ultimately had some affiliation to Arizona. Like Devin Cambridge played at Hillcrest for a year. That's how I got to know him. Colton, I was trying to think of any other guy that might have Arizona connections. But before that, there's just guys that you kind of just form. I think the biggest thing, honestly, has been spiritual. Like if you're a strong believer, obviously I'm a Christian. There's some guys out there that there's a lot of guys that obviously have a faith. There's some guys that are super spiritual that really follow their faith to a huge standpoint. And you can kind of connect on that aspect, and that's really where a relationship can grow. There's been quite a few guys that say in that aspect and how you form that, but really just getting to know guys more and more, and you just hit them up. Like if you really connect, and that's been like I said for some of these guys, you just kind of start talking to them, and you really just kind of build that trust with them. And I mean, obviously, you can't consider them as like best friends or something like that because
Yeah.
if you're not going to hang out with them all the time, but something where if they're in town, they're going to come over and hang out, or they're going to go, you're going to hang out with them, go here or there. Like if they come into for college now, they come into college or state to play, they get you tickets that you hang out before or after the game, something like that. Like just that kind of stuff, and that's just really from just truly form that other closer relationship, I'd say.
Yeah, and that's actually like I try to talk about religion too much because like some people believe in what you believe, some people don't. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like I don't really talk about it, but that is a good point. Like if you find that person that kind of has that same faith as you do, like it's kind of like oh like no way we're kind of similar on that aspect. Like, that's pretty cool. And then you somehow just that is actually a really good point. And now a couple more just I guess you could say like interview specific questions again, and then we'll kind of wrap it up with a good final question. So one, I know you said you're kind of doing these pre-draft stuff and all that, and I'm sure it's like I'm sure some of them you have interviewed before, like when were younger and everything. And I do know I asked you like, oh, you repeat interviews, and you're like, yes, like I interview the same guys, and that's something I'm kind of thinking of doing now because again, there's only so many really good players out there you could interview that I think at a certain point or another, I'm probably going to start to repeat them eventually. So how do you like repeat those interviews, and how do you make like I guess in terms of the high school guys, how do you make them different from the original ones since they're still probably in high school and not much has changed?
Yeah, so I would say this: the biggest reason why I've redone high school ones has been honestly the ones I did before weren't very good. Not necessarily the guy's fault. Just I
Yeah,
wasn't that like you didn't really have the story behind it. It would be like a 10, 15-minute interview that was basically about offers and you're done. So that stuff I kind of want to redo it because it's basically a whole new interview. Obviously, so talk about the offers at some point, but That's one thing I've done redone on some of my high school ones. But like if you're gonna do a guy when he's a freshman or sophomore, and then you do it again as a junior, unless he commit, obviously that's different. I'll talk about that in a second. But like just randomly, like or if you transfer or something, but that wouldn't make too much sense because you couldn't really do anything now. But I would interview a guy, say a freshman or a 2023 guy, right? I probably won't interview him again until he commits. If he maybe has a transfer, maybe. Mostly if he commits or somewhere, then I'm gonna go. I talk about that because that's a whole new discussion you're gonna have with him. You discuss obviously the whole new move for him. Then for college aspect, obviously he's in college. There's a whole new different lifestyle, it's a whole new form. And NBA obviously a whole different thing. Like obviously you go back and even if it is a repeat of stuff, guys sometimes are open to do it because they even wanted to expand more on different stuff. And then in that aspect too, like this is for NBA people. It's a whole new audience you're gonna have because really you see the high school and college worlds are kind of similar to a sense. Like college is constantly following to see who the up and coming high school recruits are. NBA is not necessarily the same. I mean, they do, but there's
Yeah.
not too many guys. You're either a basketball fan that just loves any form of basketball whatsoever, but there's not many NBA fans that love college basketball. If you're just strictly that, like you're not going to go watch guys unless maybe you watch a mixtape of them before your team drafts or something. That's not
Mhm.
really the case. So at that point, it's an entirely new audience that's not too similar. So you kind of redo that whole thing for a new audience then.
Yeah, and then another thing like that is probably a challenge with interviews that I'm sure you've experienced is it's like some players, they're dry, not because they're just dry, shy people, but or I guess because they're more shy people where it takes them a couple of times to open up to you and everything, so they're not going to be as good. So not in terms of like, oh, so I'd repeat it now that he gets to know you, but more like, let's say it's your only interview with this guy and he's just not a talker. He doesn't know you, so how do you kind of combat that because that is always like a big challenge when you're talking to these guys and they just are just not into it.
That's why I have to say, going back, I know you asked this before. That's probably one of the biggest things I have improved on too. And for a long time, it's kind of like you just won't. I went with the flow for it, and that's one way, obviously, of doing it. But I would have to say, like over time, I've developed now more recently, especially like there's going to be guys that either it's the first sit down interview, and that's different. I mean, obviously, if anyone's just the very first time being interviewed, it's going to be different. Like you don't necessarily know what to expect. You don't know how to expand on different things. So you kind of just set the question up a little bit more for me. Like that's something I've done. Like I'll expand on it, kind of try bringing it. I know it's kind of hard to say exactly like what the exact wording is or phrase or how to do it. It's something that kind of naturally kind of developed over time. Like how to draw it out of them because everyone has the talkative side. It's just sometimes you have to get a guy comfortable with you and then they do it. And sometimes once again, I start like I used to do some kind of the incoming freshmen. So right now it'd be like the 2025 class or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Those guys are going to be difficult because it's just the very, very beginning. They don't have anything to talk about. But when you have a guy that's been an experienced high school guy or a guy that's in college now, like there's ways to pull it out of them. And they've obviously gone through life now. Just kind of find a way to get them open up and be comfortable with you.
Yeah, I have to admit though, and I feel like middle school basketball, like, I think that like if I could just find out, like if ESPN made rankings on the middle schoolers as well, like that
Mm-hmm.
thing is a gold mine because a lot of those kids, because they have no interview experience. Like I'm actually gonna post or after this interview, I'm gonna post one that I did with a kid in 2025. I did it with him in person. Like they're actually at least some of them, of course, some are shy, but it's
Mm-hmm.
more because it's their first time and they're young and little. So once you kind of establish like, hey, this is gonna be fun, it's actually pretty good. Like I really do believe like middle school basketball is a gold mine if you could really find out who's good because those kids aren't getting as much attention. So none of them are Hollywood. So like if there was a way for me to find out about them earlier, like that thing is just like you have no idea how easy it is to get in contact with those kids, but it's just a little
Mm-hmm.
risky.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And then I guess my final question, kind of like a good one to wrap it up, even though we kind of talked about it, but it's more like, I don't want to end the interview on that. I want to end it on a good closing question. So just what are you kind of doing right now to, achieve that goal of getting on TV and everything like that?
Yeah, so I think right now it's like I said, ultimately the key to a lot of things, in my opinion, like my route's gonna be different. I know some people, well, majority of them take the route of going to college, getting a degree, and working your way up that
Mhm.
way. That's something that can work. Obviously, it has worked for different people, but the way I view it is for this aspect of life, like there's only 8, 9 jobs. I mean, you have what, 3 ESPN shows Get Up, First Take, and whatnot, like
Yeah.
Jacoby and that. And then you have Fox Sports has their version of the morning show. You have Undisputed, you have whatnot. Like, there's only so many spots in the world for this, and a lot of people do it with don't have that intention of being on TV. Like, there's hundreds of thousands of people now that love sports, that want to do sports writing, sports something in the media. That's something that obviously most of the people, thankfully, don't want to be on TV. There's a good amount that would love to cover, be on SportsCenter or something like that in the live. And those are the people you have to compete with. And ultimately, for me, it's really difficult when you're going to taking the college route of just trying to go through getting a degree in that, and then kind of going through internships and whatnot. Like, you're also competing with hundreds of thousands of people that want that same job. So my aspect is, if that comes to be, then I'll do it. But my aspect has always been, why not start a little bit earlier and get to know them? Because at the end of the day, the people with the most power in the world really are the people that the media covers. Like, you look at any aspect of life, whether it be political, obviously the presidents will get a lot more attention than some senator or something. Like, the people that have a bigger name will have more power and more say so in what you do. So if you know the guys that's the next stars in the NBA, and that's what it kind of is tough. Like, you don't know who's going to pan out. Like, anyone could become the next John Morant that's unranked and come out of there. That could be your next guy that is a primetime top 1, 2, 3 player. You get to know and ends up having a devastating injury or just goes down the wrong path or something like that. Like, you don't necessarily know, but if you can create enough connections, I feel like, and you get to the point where these guys are being drafted, like I said, obviously Evan Mobley was a pretty good connection, I have to admit. Like, Moses Moody, getting to know him was a pretty good connection. Davion Mitchell, like, getting to know those guys. Obviously, once again, you don't know that Evan will be a top 2, top 3 pick. Anything could happen when he gets to the NBA, though. Any of these guys, and they could also become generational talents. You don't know yet. No one's guaranteed. So I think getting to know those guys, and those guys that do eventually pan out, if you have a good enough relationship and you're able to get them on an interview, like, that's going to be a lot bigger than per se like doing them in high school. Like, they're going to have a much huger platform, and that will bring on followers and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of my thing, is just building more and more connections, and that's why I've been growing, doing each level I can possibly cover, because I know eventually the goal will be growing, and the more followers you have, the more connections you have, the more of a likely opportunity you can have of landing whatever really scenario you want in any aspect of life.
Yeah, and actually, I just realized, like, literally just now, something that I actually did want to talk about before that question. But I luckily it popped up to my head was, I don't know if you're still with the season ticket, but even if you're not anymore, like, I feel like not many people, like, overtime they have, like, all those, like, adults. Like, I guess you're kind of like at the right age, but obviously for me, I'm still in high school, so I can't be like overtime Larry with like an established company or stuff like that. But how did you really get that opportunity? And do you think there are like a lot of opportunities out there for people, because you see people that make mixtapes and they could get signed any age to Ball is Life, even Ball Dogs now, or any of that stuff. But I feel like for people that do these interviews, like, there's not many opportunities. So kind of how did that come about, and do you think that like more opportunities will come for older interviewers?
So for that aspect, that was something that they reached out to me and they made connection with, and ultimately wasn't necessarily what I really was looking for. It wasn't the best scenario. That's kind of a long discussion what happened there. But personally, like, for me, like I said, my main thing is I kind of like being on my own terms. I know I might not bring in as much money as I possibly could bring in at this point in time,
Yeah,
but again, my own aspect is I kind of want to have my own rights and my own control of what I do. And at this point, high school is growing. Don't get me wrong; it's growing immensely right now. This with overtime league starting, there's a lot of stuff happening right now. It's going to grow this high school brand a ton in the next few years, but there's not as much money in this as there was long term, and that's not necessarily. It's not a lot of it's not about money. It's not really about money for me either. But I do know that having my own thing, kind of working, covering college, and that is going to help grow me. Once again, going back to what I just said, like, that's what I ultimately want long term. So I knew that building my own brand, doing this on my own self, is what's going to help me, and I didn't really want to be locked into something. So personally, I decided to kind of be on my own self, and I don't really want to sign with anybody. Obviously, things could come up as some nice deal or something that comes in eventually, then yes. But, and I'll even open it. It's not just a Fox Sports or ESPN. Like, it could be even this person at Barstool type of thing. All these different reports on their own different shows, stuff like that. Those are much bigger opportunities, much broader opportunities that can get you rolling. Something at the high school level, like Overtime Larry, as big as he is, I'm not quite sure there's going to be as many opportunities if you wanted per se ESPN job
yeah.
or something, just because it's not necessarily, I wouldn't say it's not necessarily as professional, but I mean, it still is, but it's much different than what you can see on the.
Yeah, it's different stuff. It's different
Yeah.
stuff.
And I think a lot of people know that these are the kids. It's not something that a lot of people value as much. And like I said, it's going to be growing. I think there will be opportunities. Obviously, these things are different brands are growing and whatnot. But ultimately, people always know that at the end of the day, whatever wants to come up eventually, the same people that's going to be controlling the NBA, which is Fox Sports, ESPN, those teams, they're still going to be dominating the high school game. They're still going to be dominating college. Like it's pretty much you're not going to beat those brands, and ultimately ESPN is not going to put in a lot of money into high school. They're not going to go. They have Paul Biancardi, which does whatever he does in terms of rankings and his occasional IG lives and whatnot. That's what he does. But there's not too much. They always about revenue. And they know that a kid with, even if you're a great player, like obviously Mikey Williams is a different story. Imani Bates is a different story. Those guys, 100 Sky Clark, Dior Johnson, 100,000 of followers is a little bit different. But if you're even per se, I don't know, a number. Mark Mitchell just came to my mind. He's someone that's a top player. I think he's at what? I think it's somewhere under 10,000. Quite a few guys, the top 10 ranked players are under 10,000. That's not going to bring them in too much money. That's not going to bring them in a lot of revenue. So in that aspect, it's not going to grow to that level eventually. But I do think that in terms of just getting a job where you could get paid some type of compensation at the high school level, it's definitely possible. But for me, like as a person, my goal is ultimately long term. So that's why I kept it by myself and my own brand.
Yeah, for sure. Well, all right, man. Anyways, I really, really appreciate you. You're probably, the GOAT, the trailblazer in this whole interview thing. So yeah, I mean, if it really wasn't for you, like you were definitely one of those really main people that kind of helped me out in the beginning and everything. And I'm not like big time or anything, but obviously, like I think doing this for over a year, I at least is somewhat of a decent accomplishment. So I just really, really appreciate you for all your help and always helping me and answering all my questions. So it really means a lot. But yeah, so make sure you guys give us a follow on Instagram at _shoes, the underscore, and that's spelled SCHUZ, if you guys are wondering. Then my Instagram's iHoopsFL. Anyways, for Zach, Shoes, Schumaker, I'm Isaac Fleischer, and this has been another iHoopsFL interview. Peace out, guys.